Okay, so I'm looking over the Ed puzzle from yesterday and looking at the answers to the question about the subjective versus the objective aspects of work. Now, this is something I just wanted to riff on a little bit because it's really important for life. I want you to think about this with your future career choices and the kinds of work that you want to be doing and how you want to do it. Okay, so the objective elements of work have to do with the thing being made, okay, so the actual product of work, and then the non-human elements that go into making that product. Okay, so let's say you're making a table. Okay, the objective aspects of that work would be the table that ends up being made, the end product, and then all the materials and the tools and the machinery that go into making that table. Okay, those are the objective things. Why are they objects? Because they're not subjects, they're not persons. Okay, so the subjective element to making that table then would be the human contribution, and particularly how the process of making that table affects you as the table maker. Okay, so that's got a lot of things going on in that. Okay, we are physical and spiritual beings. Okay, and we're both at the same time. So everything we do with our bodies affects us spiritually. Everything we do with our minds, our souls, affect our bodies as well. It's that psychosomatic connection. All right. Okay, so whatever you do, whatever work you do with your body is going to have some kind of spiritual effect on your intellect, your will, your emotions. All of those things will be affected by the things you're doing with your body, and vice versa. Okay. All right, so I want to compare the process of making a table in a factory, let's say making an aluminum or a steel table in a factory using a sort of assembly line process versus like an artisan woodworker who is hand making a table, even if he's using tools. All right. So the objective and the subjective elements in both. Okay. The tools might not be that much different, although the factory is going to have a lot more machinery probably. But the artisan's probably going to be using power tools and saws and things like that as well. Okay, but there's a huge effect, I think, on the person who's actually making the table. All right, so I'm going to show you a quick video from it's a clip from Nick Offerman's wood shop. Okay, Nick Offerman, of course, is on Parks and Recreation and a lot of other things, and he's pretty well known because he's like a professional woodworker. So I'm going to show a couple minutes from this, which is a tour of his wood shop, and he talks about the tools that go into making a table or a tray by hand and how that actually affects the person making it. Okay. So how the tools that you use affect your experience of making the table. So he's talking about how the objective elements affect the subjective aspect of work. All right, we'll pause here and move to that.
So, as I mentioned, you take a look at a chisel, and it's just this beautiful sharpened wedge of steel. And with a chisel, you can use it in a couple directions to have different effects. You can pare and you can kind of carve. And every woodworking tool, you take it, then you look at a plane. The plane blade is just a wide chisel that's encased in this clever housing, so that it does something much more specific. It takes a regular shave-in
every time.
And that's what really every hand tool is. A saw is just a bunch of tiny chisels lined up so that they'll cut the wood fibers.
Right.
So when I get people started, I always suggest that the less electricity you can use, the more pleasurable your woodworking will be, because you don't have the noise and you don't have the dust. And you don't have the expense of any power tools.
So forego the power tools and stick with the hand tools.
As much as possible. So I tell people to go to the lumber yard and find somebody who knows the wood, talk to them about their wood. And these are some pieces of big leaf maple from Oregon from a guy that I know. And there's some planks that I used in a workshop. And I just have my students cut off what looks like a nice size cutting board. And a cutting board is a great place to start, because look, you've made one cut and that you're almost done. You strike a line. It doesn't even have to be straight, but you can use it to teach yourself to cut a straight line. And I'm telling you, if you get a Japanese pull saw, which cuts on the pull, or a classic Western crosscut saw. If you get one of these days from the hardware store, they're nice and sharp, they last a long time, and you'll be amazed at how easy, if you take your time and slowly begin to use it, you can make a cut.
Yeah.
That alone will feel like a superpower. And then I just have people, there's different sanding accessories you can get. This is a little wedge that takes hook and loop sanding discs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like a little Nerf handled circle. And these are great for our natural edge stuff because it's not flat. It allows you to get into all these contours. And then I just have them go to town, and they usually work up a sweat because they get into it. And you make all the edges nice. You clean it up as nice as you want. And then once you oil that, all this figure, all this color comes out, and they say, I'm a genius. This is just making a rectangle. Now, then you make 4 of those, and you start by putting them together maybe with dowels by drilling. But, then you go from a rectangle to a box. You go from a box to a set of drawers.
Right.
And then you build a piano.
And I guess, you tell the story of your humble beginnings of things when you were a little kid. You weren't doing anything on band saws and jointers.
No, that's something I love to communicate about woodworking is that if you take a bucket of nails and slap together a bunch of planks into a doghouse, congratulations, you're a woodworker.
Right.
And if you enjoyed it or your dog enjoys it, then maybe you make a better doghouse or you move on up to a horse house or a cow house and eventually a person house. And then you find a mate. Then you have children and you teach them to sand.
And you're off to the races.
Hakuna Matata. You're part of the circle of life.
Okay. Well, we very much.
Okay, so you hear him talking about using hand tools to make things like trays or tables or whatever it ends up being. Okay, and the process and the effect that just cutting a piece of wood with a saw and making a square out of a piece of wood can have, and how satisfying that can be. All right, so think about this: the process of making a table in a factory. Okay, let's say a steel table. You've got a factory with an assembly line, and basically what happens is the people there are going to be taking pieces of metal, let's say it's aluminum, and they'll set it in a machine that's going to stamp the aluminum into whatever shape it needs to be, and then they'll take it off and they'll move on to the next guy. Okay, so one person's job might just be take the aluminum, set it there, pull this lever, and boom, move it on to the next, and do that over and over and over again for 8 hours. Okay, think about physically what's involved in that while you're lifting. Okay, but you're doing the same repetitive motion over and over again. And spiritually, what's happening there? Spiritually, in a broad sense, well, what's your mind doing? Nothing, basically. All right, so intellectually, you're not very engaged. Okay, you're not engaging your creativity. You're not thinking critically or using any kind of, you're not injecting your personality into it at all, right? It's just a very repetitive kind of motion that doesn't involve your the full kind of reality of who you are as a person. All right. And so there are probably half a dozen different jobs like that in the factory where it's very simplistic and it engages maybe one aspect of you as a person, and that's it. Okay. So it's going to be mind numbing. It's not going to help you develop as a person at all. Okay. It's not going to allow you to exercise creativity. Now, if you're making a table out of wood using hand tools or power tools, okay, he's got a lot of power tools in his shop as well, but you are going to be involved in selecting the wood, all right, and then choosing how to shape that wood, all right, and then designing the final product. So your intellect, your will, your emotions, your passions are all directed towards what is the final product going to look like, and then you are physically and mentally, spiritually involved in every single part of that process in bringing that final product out. So you are really injecting your entire personality, every aspect of you as a person, into making that table. All right. So the final product is not just the end product of an assembly line of people mindlessly doop, 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 doop. All right. But it's actually a work of art in a sense that bears the mark of the personality of the one who made it. Okay. So who's going to be more satisfied by the subjective process of making those tables? Well, clearly the artisan. Okay. Now you've got other factors to consider. So the artisan's table is going to cost probably 10 times as much, if not more, than the mass-produced factory table. So I'm not saying we need to get rid of mass production completely. All right. But this is why historically, a lot of people were concerned about industrialization and changing the work process from that more artisan-based approach, which actually involves the whole person, to this mass-produced, okay, everybody can go buy a $50 table at the store and we could all have the same metal table in our kitchens, okay? And nobody gets any satisfaction out of making it. And the final product, I'm not sitting here eating dinner on a work of art that somebody poured themselves into. I'm sitting here eating dinner on a piece of metal that a bunch of people, lifted onto a belt or onto a stamping machine and then lifted off of that. Okay, so that's a little example of how the subjective aspects of work are more important than the objective aspects. Okay, so think about that as you are planning a career or deciding what you want to do once you're done with school. Okay, there's a lot to be said for doing things with your hands and having control over the direction that your business or your product is going in, and being able to inject your personality and your creativity in your work. Okay, all right, that's kind of my soapbox, but I hope that was somewhat inspiring for you.